Tony has the awesome theme, so I'll stick with my journey theme. Like Nick, Sarah Jackson started life in a very, very distant place, a foreign land. Hers was the great state of Utah. And after spending some time there, she decided she needed to go east. And she earned her BA at the University of Utah, a master's degree at the University of Michigan, and a PhD at the University of Minnesota. And she decided she needed to go still further east. So she came to Northeastern on a 3-year postdoc. And after 1 year, we were afraid she might continue to go east, and so we decided she needed to stay. So we converted her from a postdoc to a tenure-track assistant professor. Sarah is not quiet, though, and you might have heard her coming because she often appears in the media. She's been on in the Huffington Post. She's been featured on WCVB Boston Television, The Mark Steiner Show, and my favorite, Bitch Magazine, real publication. She does publish, though, in more academic places, including the Harvard International Journal of Press and Politics and Feminist Media Studies. And her big work, her first book, will be coming out in 2014. It's Black Celebrity, Racial Politics and the Press, and it'll be part of Routledge's Transformation in Race and Media series. So I give you the awesome Dr. Sarah Jackson.
Thanks, Dale. Thanks, everyone, for sticking around after the break. So you sort of stole my introduction, which I was going to say. I'm really excited. This is my current book project. I've only been under contract for 2 or 3 months, so I'm still super excited about it. And it's still in the early phases. So I'm going to talk to you all about it today. The title of the book is Black Celebrity, Racial Politics and the Press. I know there's a microphone, but I have a hard time standing behind a podium. It's against my nature, so I'm going to do this. Okay, so just a little background about what the inspiration for this project was. In 2005, I was at the University of Michigan, and I was part of a large research cluster that was looking at the way that journalists covered Hurricane Katrina. And we had a whole bunch of different questions about sort of the way Hurricane Katrina was being talked about in the public sphere and what the different narratives were. And one of the really, really interesting research findings that I happened to stumble upon and then ended up being my thesis was that before, does everyone remembers Hurricane Katrina, right? So does everyone remember Kanye West going off script during the telethon to raise money for Hurricane Katrina victims? Do people remember this? So what people commonly remember was that Kanye West said George Bush doesn't care about black people. And that's kind of what the media reported. But Kanye West also said a whole lot of other things. He also said, for example, quote, "This country is set up to help the poor and the black as slowly as possible. We're fighting a war abroad when we should have our troops here helping our own people." And he made a very specific media critique as well, talking about the way that particularly poor African Americans were being constructed in the media in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. And what I found in this research was a quantitative change in the way that the news media, the mainstream news media, talked about race and poverty after Kanye West made these comments, went off script and made these comments in this telethon. So what was really interesting to me was that what you saw was, up until the point that Kanye West did this, the media was being very careful to sort of cover this as, you know, a national catastrophe and all these things, but they weren't talking explicitly about racial inequality, and they weren't talking explicitly about the fact that the class inequality that existed in New Orleans was very raced in terms of who it affected. And after Kanye West made these comments, you saw a measurable quantitative change in the way that it gave journalists essentially a story, right, to say, see, a celebrity suggested that race is playing a role in the way that these people are being treated, in the way that they were not protected by the government, etc. But what was really interesting is that in the same way, at the same time that all of a sudden journalists were willing to talk explicitly about race and racial inequality, they were very dismissive of Kanye West himself. So they didn't take Kanye West seriously. They kind of went, oh, that's just, you know, how he is. He went off script. He's unpredictable. He's, you know, it's part of his celebrity persona. But at the same time, all of a sudden, they were given this opportunity to talk about something that up until that point they weren't talking about in the coverage. So I was really, really inspired by this to ask the question of what power specifically African American celebrities have in the public sphere to change national conversations about race, about inequality, about class, etc. And so what I undertook then was the beginning of what has become almost a 10-year project at this point, which is a set of case studies looking at different forms of African Americans who've dissented at different periods in American history, starting in the 1940s, going all the way up through the present, and looking at whether or not these figures had the power to actually change national conversations and change the way we as a country talk about issues, specifically issues around race and class and politics. Okay, so a little bit of background. I feel almost bad for you because after going after a music person where it's creative and you get to listen to music, I'm going to talk about theory. So apologies in advance. I'll try to be as succinct with it as possible. So a little bit of background of what sort of inspired this work is looking at the way that rhetorical agitation specifically plays a role in changing national narratives. So we know in America, since the founding of this country, it has been people who engaged in some sort of rhetorical agitation, whether it was bodily, which is a form of rhetorical agitation, whether it was verbal agitation, whether it was through song, whether it was through protest, who have been able to change our national conversations about specific issues. At the same time, we also know, and there's a lot of work that points to the fact that the way that media frame rhetorical agitation, so the way that media makes sense for their audiences, the way that journalists make sense for their audiences, what particular instances of political protest mean, what the terms of specific political debate should be, really shapes the way that the public talks about and understands these issues. And so I was really curious to see if this idea of the public sphere, this Habermasian idea of the public sphere, where it's the idea that in a democratic country, everybody should have a space where they can come together and debate the issues that affect the citizens of that country. I was really interested to see, one, how these sort of sets of political dissent by African American celebrities influenced the conversations that were happening in the public sphere, but also then how the media coverage of this political dissent and of these celebrities may be limited or enabled, who knew at that point the way that conversation was taking place in the public sphere. So this is, in case you don't know, this is Eartha Kitt, the original Catwoman. She's one of my case studies. She's pretty awesome. Okay, so a couple things. People always ask me, well, why are you looking at black celebrities? You know, why not just look at celebrities in general, or why not, you know, whatever. Okay, well, for one, I have a background in African American studies, so it's, you know, part of my academic background, but also I believe that there's something unique about black celebrity that is different. One is that often African American celebrities get access to spaces that traditionally have been closed off to other people of color in this country. So, you know, given the history of segregation and racism in the country, there are spaces within the entertainment industry, within the sports industry, et cetera, that especially in the early days were closed off to other people of color. But athletes, entertainers, etc., got access to these spaces. They got invited to the White House. They got invited to the Olympics. They got invited to these sort of high-profile spaces that other people from their same in-group did not have access to. So in that way, they had this very privileged access that others did not. But at the same time, because of their race, they had limitations. Because we know, and for example, for those of you who haven't heard of Paul Robeson, hopefully a lot of you have, that historically African-American celebrities who were political dissidents were, for example, stripped of their citizenship rights, stripped of their passports, blacklisted, etc. And so there was huge limitations on what these celebrities could do, even with the access to the public sphere that they had that was unique. And then at the same time, these celebrities often succeeded by embracing sort of national narratives around national identity and national values. So you saw figures like Cassius Clay, who would later become Muhammad Ali, become famous because he was very jingoistic when he competed for America in the Olympics and waved an American flag and talked about how much better off black people were in the United States than in Africa, and, you know, like these sorts of narratives. And so you would often see that in order to succeed, these celebrities would have to very, very, very clearly toe a line of sort of nationalism around American identity, but that at the same time, purely by their bodies being in these traditionally segregated spaces, they were challenging national identity, because when it is African Americans who start becoming the models, the role models, the heroes of sports, of music, etc., that in and of itself sort of challenges the whiteness in which the United States' national identity was constructed. And so I think that is interesting, and I put this image up here because I expect that nobody recognizes it. Anyone recognize this image? No? No?
1968 Olympics?
Oh, okay, one person. But if I put this image up of the same people, I'm guessing you all have seen it before, right? Have you all seen this image before? And so my point here is sort of the way that we what we pay attention to, and the way that sort of these figures, because of their access to this space, even as they sort of are embracing national trends and using that access for different in different ways, they're also bringing in narratives that change the conversations around issues like race, around issues like inequality, etc. So these are sort of all some of the issues that I'm brought to bear in this project that I'm working on. How much time do I have? I'm over time. Okay, perfect. Then I won't even bother going on to the other slide. But long story short, I do an examination of both the mainstream press and the African American press from 1949 to the present, looking at all these case studies. And I find a lot of really interesting findings in terms of shifting public narratives around race and how that sort of influenced or reflected what we talk about in the public sphere in America around race and politics and inequality. And if you want to know the results, you can come ask me, because I don't have time to talk about this slide right here. Okay.